Hey guys, this is Dana, and this is video number 37 in the Red Flags of a Narcissist series. Video 37 is red flag number 37, which is their excuses and stories only make sense to you. So what's going on with that? Well, I think there's 7 absolutely life-changing reasons for this. And so I'm going to go through them here in a little bit, but let me just kind of recap as far as manipulative behavior and a little bit about it, just in case some people are new. So if you've ever been in any type of dynamic with a manipulative person, and of course, manipulative people can be, young, old, male, female, they can be parents, children, significant others, spouses, friends, next door neighbors, members of your church, so on. If you've ever been in a dynamic with them, you've probably found that there's always a lot of ongoing confusion, misunderstandings, and a lot of victims or people that are in these types of manipulative relationships often think it's them. They think they're the problem, and they think to themselves they must have issues with trust or commitment or with the opposite sex or with kind of what have you. And so the way that this, I think, is most often seen has to do with these excuses and stories that we all get for bad behavior. And we will find that we tend to be the only ones that really believe them. And that a lot of our friends and family will see kind of what we're experiencing. They'll see these excuses and stories as the giant manipulations that they really are. And so when you're dealing with manipulative people, it's helpful to view kind of their behavior in this way. So manipulative people, in order for them to be able to manipulate effectively, there has to be some sort of degree of believability to what they're saying. And so this is possible because there's always some sort of kernel of truth to whatever they're saying, but it's surrounded in a big ball of a lie. And so victims are always trying to figure out kind of what's the lie, what's the truth, kind of what's what, because it's very interwoven. And that's a whole exercise in crazy making. Don't even try to go down that bunny hole, because you'll never know for sure, because these people, they lie so much all the time, even about stuff that a normal person, it wouldn't even make sense to lie about, like why they went to the grocery store instead of the gym. But it's because they've always have some sort of hidden agenda, and they're always doing stuff that they never fess up to. So that's why there's kind of this ongoing confusion. Confusion is a really fantastic sign, that you are in a manipulative situation. In a normal relationship, there can be confusion present, but it's generally cleared up within a very short period of time. I'm talking like within a few minutes, because it tends to be more of a miscommunication. It's not a manipulation. Yeah, that's the huge difference there. So let me kind of give you an example of what I mean by excuses and stories and manipulative behavior. So let's say, for example, you have a husband and wife, and the wife finds out that her husband, maybe he's getting texts, sexy texts from some strange woman. And, and maybe he's sleeping with his phone underneath his pillow. He's kind of doing what's called like a vague booking on Facebook, where he's putting these kind of vague status updates up there, where it almost seems like he's talking to somebody in specific, but he's not really mentioning it. It's just kind of a bunch of squirrely behavior. And so maybe he's telling his wife, well, these female friends that I have, they're just friends. They're just coworkers. They mean nothing to me. I'm happily married. I love you. And this other woman that's sending me naked pictures of herself, she's an ex-girlfriend. She just won't move on. I've tried getting rid of her. She just won't go away. So, okay. So kind of what's going on. I think there's a total of 7 reasons as to why we tend to stay in dynamics like this. So the first one has to do with a term called cognitive dissonance, and I'll link to a video down below. I'll just cover this really quickly, but cognitive dissonance is basically the distress that we feel when we're holding 2 conflicting thoughts about the same topic at the same time. And in particular, we're having this distress because it's really important for us to have our thoughts and our actions line up. And if they aren't lining up, then something needs to change. Either we need to change our thoughts to match our actions, or change our actions to match our thoughts. So, for example, let's say if a wife was in this dynamic and her husband's telling her all these excuses as to why these women are continually in his life, if she has the thought that she would never be married to a person who cheats, but yet it's looking like her husband is potentially cheating. If she's going to stay in that dynamic, then she needs to make her thoughts line up with that. And so she might, most likely, is going to tell herself, well, these other women are crazy. They're the problem, right? They just keep throwing themselves at him, that he's not the problem. That these other women are bitter, or they're jealous, or they're jaded, or they're crazy, or. So she's going to kind of make peace with that and be like, okay, it's not my husband. He's fine. So he's not really cheating. It's all these other women that are the problem. So now she can justify staying married to him and then go along her way. So, and again, friends and family might be kind of thinking or saying to you, this is nuts. Are you kidding? Like, this looks like this is really squirrely behavior. People don't do that unless there's something going on with them. And of course, when you're dealing with a manipulative person, they will also spin this back on the victim. And this is something that takes a long time for victims to get over, is they'll make the victim feel like the problem. And they'll say, oh, well, you've got issues with trust or with commitment or with men or with our relationship or kind of what have you. I can't handle how jealous and controlling and possessive you are. And so now the victim is feeling like, oh no, I'm the one with the problem. And so now they're working towards changing their behavior, thinking that but really, like, they're not the problem. It's their manipulative partner is the problem. So that's part of it. The second part of this is a term that's called Stockholm Syndrome. And so this is a term that was coined from, I think it was some psychologists that were watching what happened after these kidnappers, these bank robbers robbed a bank and they held some people hostage. And so what happened was, after they, the whole hostage situation cleared up and everything, several of the different people that they'd held hostage ended up having relationships, I think even marrying a couple of the bank robbers. And they were trying to figure out, how did this happen? And so the different hostage victims were saying, these people aren't bad. You don't understand them. They had bad childhoods. They were justifying all of the bad behavior in order for them to stay in the relationship. Part of the reason, it has a lot to do with cognitive dissonance, but part of it also has to do with this idea that when we experience trauma with another person, even if that other person is causing us the trauma, that's bonding. So we kind of like get through this together. And so I've heard this a lot with different people and different support groups, where it's this idea of, well, we've gone through so much together. And so there's just this idea of like, we're a team, we've gone through so much, but that's not the case. What's really going on is you've got one person that's, put the other person through so much, not the same thing. And so this other person stayed along for the ride for a wide variety of reasons that I'm going to get to here in just a second. So, and let me just take a second too to kind of cover Stockholm Syndrome just a little bit more. So this is a good example of why I really encourage you guys to be very careful about labels that you place on your understanding of your dynamic, because words like syndrome, right, sound really heavy. And so it's enough to think to yourself, oh, I've gone through this really toxic or abusive relationship, but oh my God, I've got this like syndrome on top of it, right? And so that can really kind of impede our healing. Even though it might give us clarity as to what's going on, I would just encourage you, with the way that you're framing this, that you're not potentially kind of keeping yourself stuck for longer than you need to be. So labels are good for clarity, but then I think it's important to kind of just like hold on to the understanding that the labels provide and then let them go. So we're not having this idea that we have to, now like, have this like really long process of like recovering from a syndrome, because that word just sounds very heavy. It's very loaded with kind of implied meaning. So just something to keep in mind. Okay. So the third point here is that everything that we do, we are driven to avoid pain and to seek pleasure. And so if we are in some sort of dysfunctional or destructive or dangerous dynamic of any kind, whether it be a relationship or some sort of addiction, or spending too much or drinking too much or eating too much, or the exact opposite, we're, developing an eating disorder where we're not eating, those kinds of things, we're doing that because it's either getting us out of some sort of pain or we're getting some sort of pleasure from that. So again, back to the context of a dysfunctional relationship. If we're staying in it, it's because we're associating more pain with leaving than we are to staying. And so this kind of goes into point number 4. So there's this quote out there that we are rarely upset for the reasons that we think. And this is very, very true on many levels. However, I think it kind of goes a little bit deeper than that. I feel like we rarely do things for the reasons that we think. And so this brings us to point number 5, which is everything that we really do is to meet some sort of need. And so we might be thinking that we're in this relationship because we really value commitment, or that we're in this relationship because we love this person, when in fact this causes a lot of confusion for victims, because they're like, how can I love somebody because this person's so terrible to me? So how is it that I can actually love them? And they might even feel very addicted to them. I hear this all the time. I totally can relate to feeling this way. And it's because we're trying to get some sort of need met. And odds are that this relationship, even though it's really dysfunctional, is still meeting some sort of need for us. That's why, and we're confusing this meeting of this need with love, because it's that same level of intensity, that level of connection, this intensity of like, we need this other person in our life. But that's not what love is. Love is based on, honesty and respect and dignity and compassion and open and honest communication. It's not clinging and need and fear of being alone. Like, that has nothing to do with love. That's incredible. That's very dysfunctional. But I'm going to go through that here in just a second. So part number 6, with meeting these needs. So Maslow, you're probably familiar with this, the whole hierarchy of needs. You probably studied this in school at some point. So Maslow came up with this hierarchy of needs. It's a pyramid, and the whole concept, there's 5 levels. The pyramid's been since updated to have a total of 8, but it's basically his whole concept was that we need to achieve one level before we can advance to the next one, and then we just kind of continue going up and up. And so just for the sake of simplicity, I kind of chunked down his pyramid into 4 main categories. So there's one that's physical, which is like survival kind of needs. These have to do more with, food, clothing, shelter, water, air, right? So that's the same. Emotional needs have to do with safety, security, a sense of like love, attention, affection, those kinds of things. And then the 3rd level I just call cognitive, that have to do with, it's the whole, I think it was Socrates that said the whole kind of know thyself. And so now, because we have our more basic needs met, now we can go forward and we can figure out what are our goals, what are our wants. We can actually move forward as a human being instead of focusing on just getting our basic physical and emotional needs met. And then the top level, which Maslow touches on too, I just consider this like transcendence. So it's basically now that we're stable enough in ourselves, we've got our needs met. Now we can move forward and kind of basically have things not be about us. We can let go of ourselves, and now we can focus more on giving back. So now that we've discovered who we are, we've discovered our goals and our strengths and our gifts, because we all have them, now we can go give those to the world. But so this brings me to point number 7. So this was a concept that somebody had mentioned in a support group a while back. A super fantastic concept, absolutely life-changing for me. This is a concept that's called empty buckets. And basically these empty buckets correlate to these more basic needs that Maslow has discovered, right? So the premise of the empty buckets concept is that we all have 2 buckets, 2 basic needs that somehow were not filled when we were growing up. Especially if we're having like destructive or dangerous types of behavior, then odds are it's because we didn't get some buckets filled. And so it helps to look at, okay, what kind of emotional or basic needs did I not get met, either real or perceived, growing up? And so for a lot of people, it tends to be the feelings of, security or safety or love or attention, kind of significance, right? So safety, security, significance, I guess, is kind of what it boils down to. And so now as adults, we kind of tend to do one of 3 things in order to get those empty buckets filled. But again, none of this is really subconscious. This is why our behavior can be so crazy making and confusing to us. because we just don't know kind of what's driving us. But I really feel like this is what's it. So, okay, it's one of three things. So the first one is, if these buckets aren't filled, then we're seeking out dynamics with other people to try to get these buckets filled. So this is why I think a lot of us tend to get in really dysfunctional relationships, is we're wanting that love or that security or stability, but we're trying to get it from another person. Of course, this by and large doesn't work because, you know, marriages fail, people die, people leave. There's other things that happen. If our sense of, you know, if our basic needs are being met by somebody else, then that sets us up to fail. It's very disempowering, even though it might kind of work in the short term. Even if our marriage or our dynamic with them is super healthy, it's still not like the most kind of empowering way for us to go about getting those needs filled. So the second way we go about getting our needs filled or those buckets filled is that we oftentimes tend to develop unhealthy coping mechanisms to get them to just cope with the fact that they were never filled. So, and again, this is all just my opinion, but it seems like, you know, a lot of people, if you're drinking, if there's people are really promiscuous, if there's, you know, drug addiction, if there's any type of behavior, especially if you're feeling that it's a problem in your life, then it's worth looking at and thinking, am I being driven by trying to fill these empty buckets? You know, again, you see a lot of kids that don't have that sense of stability in their life or that sense of connection. They get into gangs, or people become institutionalized in prisons and they're just constantly in the prison system. It's a lot of this, like trying to get these more basic emotional kind of needs met. Or if you were a child, let's say you moved around a lot, and so you really didn't have that sense of security, or you had a parent who dated a lot and there was kind of the stream of different people in and out of your life. It makes sense that you would be really highly motivated to have your own family and to keep that together at all cost. So again, it's more of like that deeper need. So here's the third, what I feel is really kind of the solution to this, is to meet those needs ourselves, right? So filling those empty buckets ourselves. So now that you can kind of reflect back and think, okay, where are my vulnerabilities? Because this is really what our vulnerabilities boil down to. And this is how manipulative people exploit us and they use us. It doesn't have so much to do with, you know, we might be recently divorced, or our age or our weight or our height, or you know, how much money we have or don't have. It doesn't really necessarily have anything to do with that. It's these, I believe it's these deeper needs that they're able to effectively exploit. So for example, and I touched on this in another video, some of my empty buckets are, I tended to feel very ignored and unloved. And so I don't think this was intentional on my parents' part, but that's just how my child's mind interpreted what was going on in my childhood. Well, because of that, I was really looking to get those empty buckets of like love and attention filled. And I was doing that oftentimes through friends and through dating. Well, I looked back on my life and I'm like, I have really had a lot of really highly manipulative, very toxic people in my life. And then it was sort of this aha moment of that's why, because I was such a sucker for the love bombing and the rushing of intimacy, because I was so starved out for that attention and that love. And manipulative people, of course, will just lay it on really thick because that's how they're able to effectively manipulate us. So to pay attention to different empty buckets that you have. And again, I think this really ties into why we feel so addicted to these people. And it's because they are at some level meeting a need for us that we can't let go of. We're not okay with walking away from that, because it's in our brain. This is a basic human need, and our brain really is equating this with, if we walk away from security, that this might equal death. You know, and I think this is kind of why a lot of people tend to have a lot of PTSD and this kind of stuff when these relationships end. It's that whole kind of survival, you know, our like reptilian brain. The brain has three parts to it, right? So it's that more basic brain that just freaks out, and it's like, oh no, and trying to make sense of things, and it's just kind of in this scramble. So I found it's really helpful. Okay, so now that you know what empty buckets that you have out there, now you can go about trying to fill them in a healthy way. So if you're having the empty bucket of not feeling loved, or, no sense of, maybe stability is a good one. So if you grew up feeling very unstable, there's things that you can do about this now in order to fill that, right? So you can do things like making sure that you have a savings account, making sure that, you take care of your car, making sure that you have enough food in your refrigerator, making sure that you're providing enough stability for yourself. So it's basically like us parenting ourselves now. And so giving all of that stability to yourself now, giving yourself all of that love and attention, and significance. So that could be starting a new hobby. That could be finding some really, kind of empowering people. You're giving all of that stuff that you didn't get as a kid. You're now giving it to yourself as an adult. I think once you start doing that, then you will find that it's so much easier to just walk away from any type of toxic dynamic, because you don't feel so compelled to fix it and to make it work, because now you realize you can get these needs met in other ways, and you're not like clinging to that. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that kind of gives the clarity to you that I'm hoping it will. So that's what I have for you on this sign. I know this was kind of a long video, but I appreciate you listening to it. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, frustrations, feedback, you need some support, you just want to say hi, the best place to get a hold of me is this support group. There's also lots of other people there that we would love to be able to give you feedback and support. I will link to that down below as well. And as always, lots of love to you guys. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care, and I will talk to you soon. Okay, bye.